silence your phones, or your watches, or your computer chips. Um, Everybody who is in this room knows who I am, so I'm not going to introduce myself. Our, our church went on a mission trip the end of September, beginning of October, to Western North Carolina to do a recovery mission from Hurricane Helene. And I thought I would remind you about Hurricane Helene. It absolutely devastated that part of the state. It happened September the 27th of last year. We were there September the 28th. And it was as if the hurricane had just happened in terms of the trauma people were feeling. There were 108 deaths reported directly because of the hurricane. That doesn't include people who died because of after effects of the hurricane. For instance, a lot of people lost refrigeration. Well, if you were out in a holler and you were a diabetic, that meant your insulin was compromised. And so we don't know how many people died of tangential causes from the hurricane. It destroyed the infrastructure, the homes, and the businesses. Still on I-64, I-80, I think it's 80. Once you get to Asheville, north of Asheville, I-80 is still under construction. So, for instance, if I go to Michigan, normally I'd go up I-80. What they do now is they route me through Virginia to get there because of road construction. The roads off of the main highways are still devastated. More than 73,000 homes were damaged enough by the storm to be considered to be uninhabitable. 73,000. After a year, most people have forgotten the hurricane has ever happened because it's been about 48 weeks since you heard any news reports about it, unless you live in North Carolina. People ask me about FEMA assistance. FEMA assistance was officially slowed in North Carolina. And reimbursements, particularly for rural counties, have not yet happened at all. One of the things that you need to know is that there are no FEMA trailers left in Western North Carolina for people whose homes were devastated. And vouchers for temporary housing for those people have stopped. The recovery support from FEMA for Hurricane Helene in North Carolina was barely 9% of the total cost for hurricane recovery. There are also difficulties that people are having in terms of getting approval to have their houses repaired. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about FEMA is you have to get the house repaired and then you're reimbursed. Well, if you don't have the money to get the house repaired, there's no FEMA money for you. The other difficulty with getting housing repairs through FEMA is that you have to be able to spend hours on the phone in order to get to talk to a real person. Anybody who has ever even called their doctor's office knows how difficult it can sometimes be to get to talk to a real person. And a lot of the information that is required for FEMA in terms of documentation, that documentation was destroyed during the floods because the paper trail was gone. So people who are in, FEMA does not have an economic criteria for help. It's basically based on the documentation you have and the reimbursement policy. If you're poor or if you're working full-time, getting through the process of FEMA is next to impossible. So generally what happens with FEMA is the fact that people who are in the upper middle class, higher class, get FEMA assistance easier and earlier because they've got the time, or they can hire someone to take them through the process. And there are companies that specialize in helping somebody get through the government process. So what is happening is in the smaller counties, the less populated counties, the poorer counties are discovering that they're out of the loop. A lot of the poorer counties are not seeing the reimbursements that they thought or were told that they would be getting. And one of the things that we saw whenever we went was what we expected to see. The people that we helped were on the lower income status. This is the team we took. There were 8 members on our team, and if you look at the picture, you can probably tell that all of the members of the team except one were in their mid-70s and older. But we did heroic work. We stayed in a local church in Canton, North Carolina. Some of you may be familiar with Canton. And the cots that you see here were smaller than the mattress you see here. So when we would put the mattresses on the cot the first night to go to sleep, the mattress fell off of the cot. So we wound up sleeping on the floor on the mattresses, which wasn't bad getting down, but you can imagine a lot of people in their mid-70s, late 70s in the morning. I wish I'd had a videotape of us doing the necessary. Yeah, it was funny and painful at the same time. These are not luxurious accommodations. They divided us into 2 teams of 4. One of the teams went to Black Mountain, North Carolina, which is close to where Montreat is. Thank you very much. And they worked with the Padilla family. And you can see some of the members of the Padilla family here. It was an intergenerational family. Grandma, mom and dad, 3 kids, and a cousin. And the little girl that's in the grandmother's arms is nonverbal. The story for the Padilla family was the fact that the mom and dad were down watching the creek to decide when they had to leave. The creek was rising rapidly. What they did not realize was that the mountainside was saturated, and a large oak tree fell on the house and split the house in two. Actually split the house in two. They ran into the house, and their little girl was playing in the front room and was this far from the tree. They said that what got them through the 12 months was the fact that their daughter had not died. Anytime they were ready to give up, they would say, but our daughter didn't die. It could be worse. One of the things that happened, wait a second. Sorry. One of the things that happened the second day that we were working on the house, this was a house that was back in a holler. And one of the things that happens is that you have the creek and you have a bridge that goes over the creek. Those are private bridges, which means that they're not getting repaired by any public agency. So the family has to figure out, how do we get across the creek to get into the house? Well, the second day that we were there, they had built a tiny little bridge out of wood that crossed the creek, but it was tiny, and their cars went over it, our car went over it. Unfortunately, on the way home that night, the car didn't make it over it. And so this is a picture of their car in the ditch by the creek. And this is a picture, the other picture is us trying to tow the car out of the creek with one of our other cars. What happened was they had AAA, wonderful AAA. They called AAA. 3 hours later, AAA showed up with the tow truck. And the tow truck looked at the car in the creek and said, we can't help you, because it's the way this is, our tow truck can't get in to pull you out. So we wound up pulling the car out with these ropes. They had a very bad day because that morning they had gotten lost trying to get to the house. They ended the day by winding up in a ditch. And you can see it there. This house had been under construction for several months, and the family was living in a trailer that the United Methodist Church Corporation had given them that was behind the house. The trailer wasn't big enough for all of them, so the husband and wife, even though the house was considered to be uninhabitable, would stay in a bedroom that wasn't totally destroyed. It was okay for them to sleep on the floor in sleeping bags. So that's what they had been doing for a year. They were cooking on a propane 2-burner stove. And they had, you know how in campers, they had a refrigerator about the size of this podium? So they were feeding 3 adults and 4 children on a 2-burner propane stove out of a refrigerator about the size of this stand for a year. But because they were so close to being done, our crew was doing finishing touches at their house. So they were painting, they were installing furniture, they were exploring things. They took out 7 buckets of mud that was in the windowsills from the flood. And when they were done, when they were done, they kind of looked like this. Yay! All that was left in this house to do was to get the permit from the electrical company to turn back on the electricity. So they are back in their house. Hallelujah and amen.
What kind of heating do they have?
In the trailer, they had propane heat, gas heat from the big gas propane tanks. In the house, they had gas and electricity. It was the electricity they couldn't get back on. Our team went to Waynesville. I don't know if y'all know where Waynesville is. We went back in the holler, and on our way there, it was about 45 minutes from where we were staying to get to Waynesville. And we would pass trailer parks where you could tell people were still living in campers. They weren't trailer parks as much as they were camper parks at that point. We also would pass huge piles of trees that were down, bigger than this stage. We would pass piles of trees and limbs as big as MMEC that they had cleared out and just put into piles. This is my team, and this is Sandy. Sandy is the woman we were helping, and she lived in a double-wide trailer. And Sandy lost her husband during COVID. So she went through COVID, losing her husband, and then having her home destroyed. And Sandy was a hoarder. Now, I don't know when she became a hoarder. I don't know if all of the trauma turned her into a hoarder or if she had always been a hoarder. Sandy had, do you know what a pod storage unit looks like? Okay, she had 4 pod storage units on her property and 3 sheds. And she was living in a camper behind her house. This is what her house looked like. And you see that shower curtain in the front? That was her front door after the flood. So she's still living with that, She's still living with that as her front door. That's her porch. And then the first day we were there, it took the entire morning to clean out her front room so that we would have room to work in there. Her front porch had been enclosed, and she had been using it as an office living space, but it was totally torn off by the hurricane. And so they had rebuilt her front porch, and when we got there, what we saw was just the insulation. That's all that was there. What we did was put up drywall. The other end of that drywall board is me. I learned how to drywall, I learned how to mud, and I learned how to sand. And at one point, I told the members of my congregation that it paid better than being a preacher, so I may have found a new career. But you can see in the other picture me mudding. We did not have any equipment the first day we got there. And so we were trying to put drywall up on the ceiling, and my job was to hold this board so it would hold up the piece of drywall so that they could nail it onto the ceiling. And they didn't have a ladder there for us yet. And so they were actually standing on those black and yellow storage bins to reach the ceiling. Finally, on Wednesday, praise be to God, we got a lift. And we thought we had died and gone to heaven, because a drywall lift makes it so much easier to put drywall up on a ceiling. And then we were still piecing together drywall. This is the room that you saw that was just insulation. In a week, we drywalled it, we mudded it, we sanded it, and it was ready to paint when we left. And that was 2 rooms that we had done in the course of a week. I was the only person who had arms that were strong enough and healthy enough to sand the ceiling. So this is not clown makeup. That's what my face looked like after I had sanded the ceiling. So we went from the left-hand picture to the right-hand picture in the course of a week, and we did the porch and the front room. And they were astonished at what we accomplished in such a short period of time. It was so funny because they were there going, when we saw your crew, we were like, okay, mid-70s, construction work. This isn't going to work really well. But it was a wonderful time, and whenever they came back, they said, you all have done more work in a week at these 2 houses than crews we have had made up of college students. And we were a little proud of ourselves. The last day, both crews got together for lunch at a local restaurant. This is our last hurrah. But the amazing thing was, in this restaurant, I don't know if y'all have ever seen those little miniature Jesuses. Well, there was a little Jesus in this restaurant up at the top of the window looking down at us while we ate. And one of the things that we said was that Jesus had been looking out for us from the very beginning to the very, very end. And Jesus had been looking out after these people. Sandy is still not back in her house. She probably has a couple of months of volunteer crews to come in to finish up, because a crew doesn't necessarily show up every week. And her house required a lot of work because it was a double wide trailer, and it was an old double wide trailer. So it was not in good shape before the hurricane came. Do y'all have any questions?
I just have 2 comments.
Okay.
FEMA, we learned here in Scotland County with Hurricane Florence that even before all the cuts, it's not all the magic bullet.
Right. FEMA is never a magic bullet.
Sometimes even like our church with a man with a doctor's degree, we just gave up all the red tape and because we couldn't wait. Our basement was flooded and we couldn't wait. So that's one thing. But the second thing is to make you feel good about our state. Our state, I don't know where they're getting the money. The education department has been sending, my daughter is in a cohort of school counselors who go there. She's been twice. She went when they first went back to school after the hurricane, and they went to certain schools to do counseling, and then she went for a week to Burnsville, where they still had in a middle school one student missing, presumed dead, and all these other traumatized children. You just can't imagine, like you
No.
said, what they have been through. But I think that's a good thing that our state Department of Education is doing.
Yes. And the other thing is the fact that there are still a lot of students, particularly back in the mountains, back in the isolated areas, who have not gotten back to school.
Well, like you said, we all know in the mountains, a lot of these people, the school buses come, and you've got to have that little private bridge to get to the school bus.
Exactly.
They can't do that, they're not going.
And a lot of the state roads, let alone the county roads, are still closed because they've not been able to clear them. They've concentrated, and I can understand why, on things like the interstates and the major highways. If you go to Black Mountain today, where the first family was, and you stayed in the downtown area or you stayed around Montreat, you would not really know that the hurricane happened. They're open for business, which was a good thing.
You gotta go out.
You've got to go out into the areas in the outlying areas. It's going to take at least 7 years for them to recover from this hurricane. At least 7 years.
They didn't have water. Our grandson lives in Fletcher. They had a tree on their house, but it didn't go through the house. They left when the tree came on the house. But he is a drug rep, and all the hospitals and doctor's offices didn't have water.
Yeah.
For a long time. They were having to bring in truckloads of water to even operate there.
And that's why we don't know how many people died from tangential reasons. But people died from tangential reason in addition to those who directly died because of the hurricane. One of the things that the volunteers do, Presbyterian Disaster Assistance did, was with Sandy. She has a caseworker who works with her to help her overcome the trauma of this incident on top of her husband's death, and with her hoarding. It is an illness in and of itself. So Right now, Western North Carolina is depending upon nonprofits to come in and help and do the necessary work. They're relying on churches and other nonprofit agencies to come in to fix the homes. And what'll happen is the nonprofits have brought in campers for them to live in because everything else is gone. Everything else is gone. On the other hand, the resilience of these people, the faith of these people, the strength of these people is incredible. It is incredible. Thank you so much for coming. I hope that this was informative and that it was hope-giving as much as it was making us realize what our neighbors are going through here in our very own state. Thank you so much.
Ted, I only have one question. Has your body recovered yet?
I'm going to tell you that my body has recovered enough that I've forgotten enough that I'll go back.
Yes, see, that's a